July 12, 1944, Norman hedgerows. Staff Sergeant Tommy Morrison watches his third 75mm round bounce off the Panther's frontal armor like a stone skipping on water. The German tank sits hull down behind the hedgerow 400 yards away, seemingly unbothered by American fire that should be tearing it apart. Morrison's Sherman, nicknamed Lucky Strike, shudders as his loader Private Eddie Chen slams another round home and screams, "Up!" Lieutenant James Holloway's voice crackles through the intercom with barely controlled panic, ordering Morrison to fire again. Morrison centers his sight picture and squeezes the trigger. The Sherman rocks backward from recoil, and through the gun smoke, Morrison watches his tracer arc perfectly onto the Panther's glacis plate. Direct hit, center mass. The round ricochets skyward in a shower of sparks, leaving nothing but a bright scar on armor that refuses to crack. Chen's voice carries the exhaustion of watching 3 weeks of futility. "That's our fourth direct hit, and we haven't even scratched the paint." The Panther's long 75mm gun swings toward them with terrible deliberation. Morrison doesn't need orders from Holloway. He's already shouting for their driver to reverse. Their Sherman lurches backward into the hedgerow as the German round passes through the space they occupied seconds earlier, close enough that Morrison feels the pressure wave slam against his face. This marks Morrison's 8th encounter with a Panther since landing at Normandy. He's scored solid hits in 6 of those engagements and achieved exactly 0 penetrations. 3 of his friends, better tankers than Morrison will ever be, died in the past 2 weeks fighting German armor they couldn't damage with weapons that were supposed to work. Morrison is 23 years old, a farm kid from Iowa who joined up 2 days after Pearl Harbor expecting to fight enemies he could actually hurt. His crew calls him Deadeye because before Panthers showed up in Normandy, he was killing German armor at 800 yards. Now he can't scratch a Panther at 400. Holloway's voice cuts through Morrison's thoughts. "Higher command says special ammunition is arriving today. Some kind of experimental round that's supposed to punch through Panther armor." Morrison stares at his gun sight while the Panther across the hedgerow waits like a predator that knows its prey is helpless. "How many rounds are we getting?" The pause before Holloway answers tells Morrison everything he needs to know. Each tank receives exactly 1. Morrison's hands tighten on his gun controls. A single experimental round against an enemy that slaughtered half his battalion. Either the round works or Morrison dies trying to prove it doesn't. There won't be second chances with ammunition this scarce. The Panther sits there, waiting. Morrison can see the German commander's head in the cupola, probably wondering why the Americans keep shooting at armor their guns can't penetrate. "Tomorrow," Morrison promises himself, "tomorrow I'm killing you with whatever miracle they're sending us, assuming the miracle actually works." Thomas Morrison grew up on 160 acres of corn and hog farm outside Cedar Rapids, Iowa, during years when depression made every bullet precious. His father taught him to shoot at 8 years old, hunting rabbits for dinner table because meat was luxury his family couldn't afford to buy. By 15, Tommy could hit running jackrabbits at 200 yards using iron sights on his father's bolt-action Springfield. The trick wasn't complicated. Wait for the right moment, compensate for distance and wind, then squeeze the trigger smooth instead of jerking it. His father's lesson was simple. We can't afford to waste ammunition, so make your shots count. December 7, 1941, changed everything. Morrison was helping repair a tractor when his mother came running from the house, shouting about the radio. Pearl Harbor, Japanese bombs, war. Tommy walked to the Cedar Rapids recruiting station on December 9th. His father didn't argue or try to stop him, just shook his son's hand firmly and repeated the same advice he'd given about hunting rabbits. Make your shots count. Morrison walked down the gravel road toward town, not knowing those words would become the difference between life and death in places he'd never heard of. The Army discovered farm boys who could shoot straight were valuable assets and made Morrison a tank gunner. Training at Fort Knox taught him to hit moving targets from moving platforms, compensate for range and crosswinds, and put rounds through windows at 1,000 yards. The instructors praised his natural ability, but Morrison knew the truth. He was just doing what his father taught him, making every shot count because wasting ammunition felt wrong. Then they shipped him to England, loaded him onto a landing craft, and sent him toward Normandy beaches where German machine guns turned the surf red. Morrison's first combat engagement came 6 days after D-Day, when his Sherman encountered a German Panzer IV near Carentan. Morrison placed a 75mm round through the Panzer's side armor at 600 yards. The German tank burned, his crew cheered, and Morrison felt professionally satisfied despite the sickness in his stomach. 3 days later, he encountered his first Panther and discovered that all his training, all his natural ability, all his father's wisdom about making shots count meant absolutely nothing when his ammunition bounced off armor like thrown pebbles. The Panther destroyed 3 American Shermans before withdrawing, and Morrison's tank survived only because they'd been positioned behind the burning wrecks of their platoon mates. That night, Morrison sat on Lucky Strike's hull cleaning his hands obsessively, though they weren't dirty. Eddie Chen found him there at 2 in the morning, staring at nothing. Morrison looked at his hands. Farm hands that had fixed tractors and shot rabbits and now fired a gun that couldn't kill what it needed to kill, and asked Chen a question that had no answer. How am I supposed to make my shots count when my shots don't count for anything? Chen had no response. Nobody did. Until today, apparently, when special ammunition was supposed to arrive and give Morrison back what the Panthers had stolen from him. The ability to fight back. The ammunition convoy arrives that afternoon escorted by military police like it's carrying bars of gold, which, in a sense, it is. Morrison and his crew join the rest of the battalion gathered around Captain Roy Henderson, who holds a single 76mm round like it might detonate if he drops it. Henderson addresses the assembled tankers with the weary authority of an officer who's watched too many Shermans burn. Gentlemen, this is HVAP. High-velocity armor piercing. The engineers promise it'll punch through Panther frontal armor at 1,000 yards, which means it should work at any range we'll reasonably engage. The tankers exchange skeptical glances. They've heard promises before from engineers who don't climb into metal boxes that German guns turn into crematoriums. Someone asks the obvious question, "How's it work?" Henderson shrugs with genuine ignorance. "Something involving tungsten and physics that's beyond my understanding. What matters is this." He holds the round higher so everyone can see. Each tank receives exactly 1 round. You will fire it only against Panthers or heavier German armor. You will not waste it on targets your regular ammunition can handle. You will not miss. Morrison stares at the round, noticing immediately that it looks wrong. The projectile seems impossibly thin, wrapped in aluminum that catches afternoon sunlight, and makes the entire thing resemble a child's toy rather than something designed to kill tanks. Henderson's expression softens slightly as he looks across the assembled crews. "I know what you boys have endured these past weeks. I know Panthers have been slaughtering us. This experimental round represents the best solution ordnance can provide right now. Make it count." That evening, Morrison sits in Lucky Strike's turret, holding his single HVAP round, which he's marked with red paint reading Panther Killer at Chen's suggestion. The round feels different than standard ammunition, lighter, less substantial. Morrison turns it over in his hands, studying every detail, knowing that sometime soon he'll chamber this into his gun and have exactly 1 opportunity to accomplish what should be impossible. His father's voice echoes across years and thousands of miles of ocean. Make your shots count. Morrison has fired thousands of rounds in training and dozens in combat. He's killed German armor at ranges where other gunners couldn't identify targets. But he's never faced pressure like this. A single experimental round against armor specifically designed to be impenetrable, with his crew's lives depending on whether engineers in distant laboratories actually solved a problem that's been killing American tankers for weeks. The round sits in his hands, impossibly light, impossibly important. Tomorrow, he'll discover if miracles come wrapped in aluminum and tungsten. July 14th, 1944. Dawn fog rolls through Norman countryside as Morrison's platoon advances toward Villers-Bocage, moving slowly through terrain where Panthers could be hiding behind every stone wall and hedgerow. Holloway's voice suddenly cuts through the intercom. "Contact! Panther at 11 o'clock, approximately 600 yards. Hull down position." Morrison swings his gun left and spots the target immediately, the distinctive profile of a Panther with only its turret visible above a stone wall, gun already traversing toward American positions. "Chen, load the HVAP," Morrison says, surprised his voice sounds steady. "Sarge, that's our only—" "Load the damn thing." The distinctive clack of the experimental round sliding home sounds different from standard ammunition, lighter somehow. Chen's voice confirms what Morrison already knows. Up! Morrison centers the Panther in his sight picture as the German tank fires first. The enemy round cracks past their turret close enough that Morrison feels the shockwave. Holloway is screaming something Morrison doesn't register because his entire world has narrowed to the sight picture, the Panther's glacis plate, the smooth trigger squeeze his father taught him 20 years ago on an Iowa farm. The gun recoils harder than Morrison expects. The HVAP round leaves the barrel traveling faster than anything Morrison's ever fired, the trajectory almost flat compared to standard ammunition. Through his scope, Morrison watches something impossible happen. The tungsten penetrator hits the Panther's sloped frontal armor that's bounced every previous American round, and this time there's no ricochet. The needle punches through like the armor is paper. A brilliant white flash erupts from inside the German tank's hull. For a frozen second, nothing happens. Then the Panther's hatches blow open violently, and black smoke vomits out. 2 German crewmen scramble from the turret, uniforms burning, while internal ammunition begins cooking off with muffled roars. Chen's voice carries pure astonishment. Holy Christ, you actually killed it. Frontal shot. You penetrated a Panther frontally. Morrison stares at the burning German tank, hands shaking now that the moment has passed. He just accomplished what everyone said was impossible. Killed a Panther with a frontal hit at 600 yards using a single experimental round. Holloway's voice has changed, carrying something Morrison hasn't heard before. Awe. Morrison, that was textbook perfect, exactly where you needed to hit. But Morrison is already thinking past this victory. 47 other Shermans in the battalion each carry a single magic bullet. Somewhere in Normandy are dozens, maybe hundreds of Panthers. The math doesn't work in America's favor. Sir, Morrison says quietly, we need a hell of a lot more of these rounds. Holloway's pause speaks volumes. Ordnance is working on it, Sergeant. For now, you just proved the experimental ammunition works in combat conditions. That counts for something. The Panther continues burning. Morrison's hands finally stop shaking. Farm boys from Iowa, making their shots count when it matters most, assuming they get enough ammunition to matter. That evening, a captain from Ordnance appears to interview Morrison about the kill. Captain Walter Barnes looks young enough to be Morrison's kid brother, but talks like a college professor, which Morrison later learns he was before the war. Barnes wants every detail, the range, the sight picture, the impact point, Morrison's observations about how the round performed differently from standard ammunition. Morrison walks him through the engagement while Barnes takes meticulous notes. When Morrison mentions the round felt lighter than standard ammunition, Barnes nods with obvious satisfaction. You notice the weight difference. Good. The secret is that the actual penetrator is much smaller than the full 76mm bore, just a tungsten carbide core about this big. Barnes makes a circle with his thumb and forefinger. But tungsten is incredibly dense, roughly twice as heavy as steel. We wrap it in a lightweight aluminum sabot that falls away after the round leaves your gun barrel. Morrison examines a training cutaway Barnes pulls from his bag. The tungsten core looks absurdly small to have killed a 45-ton tank. That tiny thing penetrated a Panther? Think of it like physics, Barnes explains. You ever push a thumbtack through cardboard versus trying to push a penny through? Same force, but the thumbtack concentrates all that pressure into a sharp point. That's what your tungsten core does to armor. Same kinetic energy as a full-caliber round, but focused into a much smaller impact area. Morrison gets it immediately. Simple farm logic wrapped in engineering terminology. So why aren't we getting more of these if they work so well? Barnes's expression darkens considerably. Tungsten. We simply don't have enough. Every round requires tungsten we also desperately need for machine tools, industrial cutting equipment, aircraft production. Right now, we're allocating what we can spare to frontline tank units, but it's not nearly enough. How not enough are we talking about? The Germans have hundreds of Panthers in Normandy. Barnes meets Morrison's eyes directly. What you did today, proving these rounds work in actual combat, helps me argue for increased production allocation. So thank you, Sergeant. Your successful engagement matters more than just one destroyed Panther. After Barnes departs, Chen finds Morrison cleaning his gun for the third time that evening, a nervous habit Morrison can't seem to break. You worried about something, Deadeye? Morrison thinks about tungsten shortages and hundreds of Panthers and single experimental rounds allocated per tank. We're going to run out of these miracle rounds long before the Germans run out of tanks. Chen doesn't argue because they both know Morrison's right. So what do we do? Morrison chambers a standard 75mm round and runs through his gun drill automatically. Same thing we've always done. Try our damnedest not to die. And when we get another HVAP round, make the shot count. Yeah, make the shot count. Morrison's frontal kill on a Panther spreads through the battalion faster than wildfire through dry grass. Suddenly, every gunner wants to know exactly how he accomplished what training manuals said was impossible. Lieutenant Holloway volunteers Morrison to conduct training sessions, which Morrison accepts with considerable reluctance because teaching feels presumptuous for a farm kid who got lucky twice. August 2nd, 1944. Morrison stands before 30 tank gunners in a field near Caen, feeling acutely uncomfortable with every eye focused on him. Someone's propped up photographs of Panthers at various ranges and angles, and Morrison has notes he wrote last night that suddenly seem inadequate. Right, Morrison begins awkwardly. HVAP works. I know this because I've used it to kill 2 Panthers now. The second engagement came 3 days previous. Another frontal penetration at 550 yards that convinced Morrison the experimental rounds weren't just lucky flukes. But here's what you need to understand. You're probably only getting a single shot, so let me share what I've learned about not wasting it. He points to the photographs showing Panther silhouettes from different angles. First, you need instant recognition. You have to know you're looking at a Panther before you commit your HVAP to the engagement. Morrison describes the distinctive features: the sloped armor, the gun mantlet shape, the way the turret sits on the hull, until several gunners are nodding with recognition. Second, range estimation matters more than ever because HVAP shoots flatter than standard rounds. At 500 yards, I aimed center mass on the glacis plate. At 800 yards, maybe compensate 12 inches high. But, honestly? Morrison pauses. Get closer if you possibly can. Why take unnecessary risks with ammunition this scarce? A young gunner Morrison doesn't recognize raises his hand tentatively. Sergeant Morrison, what happens if we miss the shot? Morrison looks at the kid's face, fresh enough that he probably arrived in France last week. Then you better have a solid escape route planned, because that Panther's going to return fire and your next round is standard ammunition that won't hurt him frontally. You'll get exactly one opportunity. Make it count. After the session ends, Holloway pulls Morrison aside with an expression suggesting approval. You're better at this teaching business than you think. I'm a farm kid who got lucky twice with experimental ammunition, sir. Luck? Holloway shakes his head firmly. Morrison, you've fired maybe 4 HVAP rounds total. 2 kills, 1 forced withdrawal, 1 miss that still made the German crew button up and retreat. That's not luck, that's skill under pressure. Morrison thinks about his father teaching him to hunt rabbits during Depression years when wasting a single bullet meant the family ate less that week. My father taught me not to take shots unless I was certain they'd count. I guess I'm teaching the same thing. Keep teaching it. We need every gunner in this battalion to shoot like you. Morrison nods slowly, but he's thinking that training only matters if they receive enough ammunition to use what they've learned. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest. Morrison's battalion is supposedly in reserve for winter refitting when German artillery opens up at 0530 hours. By 0800, they're rushing forward through morning darkness to plug gaps in American defensive lines that intelligence swore couldn't be penetrated. Morrison asks Holloway the question every tanker is thinking. How many are we facing? Holloway's response carries grim recognition. Intelligence reports Panthers mixed with Panzerfürfers, probably a full company or more. Morrison, how much HVAP are we carrying? 4 rounds, sir. A minor miracle. Last week's supply convoy brought 3 precious rounds to replace those Morrison had used. 4 rounds against a company of German armor. I've faced worse odds. That's a lie, but Morrison's crew appreciates him saying it. The fog breaks suddenly, revealing a column of German armor advancing down the forest road. Morrison counts quickly. 8 tanks total, at least 4 of them Panthers. "All tanks engage at will," Holloway orders. Morrison identifies the lead Panther at 700 yards and doesn't hesitate. "Chen, load HVAP. Going for the leader. Gutsy." Morrison centers his sight on the lead Panther's turret and fires. The tungsten penetrator hits exactly where Morrison aimed, and the German tank slews violently sideways, blocking the narrow forest road for the tanks following. "Target left, 2nd Panther." Holloway is calling ranges and bearings, while Morrison and Chen work like a machine they've become after 6 months of combat. The second HVAP round kills the 2nd Panther. 2 shots, 2 kills. Morrison's track record remains perfect, but now the Germans are returning fire with desperate intensity. A Panther round hits their frontal armor, glances off, thank God, but the impact throws Morrison against his sight hard enough that blood flows from his forehead. Chen is already loading standard ammunition because the magic bullets are exhausted. Morrison wipes blood from his eyes, trying to see through the gun sight. "Driver, get us hull down behind that knocked-out half-track." Lucky Strike lurches behind cover as more German rounds crack past. Morrison's killed 2 Panthers with his precious HVAP ammunition. 6 enemy tanks remain, and all Morrison has left are standard rounds that won't penetrate Panther frontal armor. "This is how it ends," Morrison thinks with strange calm. "Made my shots count. Killed 2 more Panthers. Not bad for a farm kid from Iowa who never wanted to be a hero." Then he hears diesel engines roaring. American diesel engines. More Shermans arriving from reserve positions, some mounting the more powerful 76mm guns. Morrison sees muzzle flashes as other tankers engage with their HVAP rounds. Panthers exploding. The German column breaking apart, retreating. Morrison slumps against his gun, exhausted. 4 HVAP rounds expended, 2 Panthers killed. Other gunners got the remaining kills using their allocation of experimental ammunition. Chen is shaking Morrison's shoulder. "Sarge, you okay? You're bleeding pretty bad." "I'm fine." Morrison touches his bleeding forehead gingerly. "Farm boys from Iowa. We're tough to kill." "That was completely insane." "That was tungsten," Morrison corrects. "And we just used every last round we had. Now we wait and pray that supply chain sends more before we face Panthers again." Holloway's voice crackles through the intercom, sounding as exhausted as Morrison feels. "Excellent shooting, Morrison. Now let's get that head looked at. We're going to need you alive for the next engagement." Christmas Eve, 1944. Lucky Strike sits in a repair depot getting battle damage fixed while Morrison receives stitches above his eye at a field hospital. Captain Barnes appears unexpectedly, looking like he hasn't slept in 3 days. "Sergeant Morrison, heard you had another productive engagement." 2 Panthers with HVAP, then we ran dry." Morrison winces as the medic pulls thread through torn skin. "Captain, I need you to level with me. Are we ever going to receive enough of these rounds?" Barnes sits heavily on an adjacent cot, and Morrison notices how much older he looks than 6 months ago. "You want the honest answer?" "Yeah. We're not going to have enough, not ever." Barnes pulls out a cigarette but doesn't light it. "Tungsten comes from mines in China, Portugal, and Bolivia. The entire Allied war machine is fighting over every single ounce. We need it for your tank ammunition, but we also need it for machine tools that produce aircraft, for ship turbine blades, for 100 other critical applications. There's simply not enough tungsten to go around." Morrison absorbs this information slowly. Somewhere on the other side of the world, Chinese or Portuguese miners are digging tungsten ore from deep in the earth. That ore becomes the ammunition that stands between Morrison's crew burning alive in a metal coffin or making it home to families who pray every night for their return. "So we keep rationing," Morrison says quietly. "Keep hoping we don't run into more Panthers than we have bullets. We're increasing production as fast as we can. By January, you might see 8 to 10 rounds per tank instead of 4. But that's still not enough against hundreds of German Panthers." Barnes finally lights his cigarette, hands shaking slightly. "You know what haunts me, Morrison? The Germans have captured some of our HVAP rounds. They're analyzing them right now in laboratories trying to copy the design. If they develop their own tungsten ammunition, can they?" Morrison interrupts. "They're running out of tungsten even faster than we are. Years of war have drained their supplies almost completely. But yes, theoretically they could produce their own version." Barnes exhales smoke slowly. This isn't just a war being fought on battlefields, Sergeant. It's being fought in mines and metallurgy laboratories and supply chains. And right now, we're winning that war by the thinnest possible margin. Morrison thinks about this hidden conflict, this war most soldiers never see. What do I tell my gunners? Keep rationing? Keep making every shot count? Tell them the truth. Tell them exactly what you've been doing, making impossible shots when they matter most. Tell them we're working on the problem as fast as we can. Barnes stands wearily. And Morrison? Keep killing Panthers. Every single one you eliminate with tungsten is one less we have to face with standard ammunition that doesn't work. Morrison watches Barnes walk away, then looks at his hands. Farm hands that learned about rationing during Depression years when every resource was precious and nothing could be wasted. Farm boys from Iowa, Morrison says to the empty space. We understand rationing better than most people ever will. March 23, 1945, the Rhine crossing. Morrison's battalion advances through German industrial towns where every rubble pile and street corner could conceal a Panther waiting in ambush. Lucky Strike now carries 12 HVAP rounds, abundance by previous standards that still seems inadequate. Morrison has killed 8 Panthers total during the war, 6 with tungsten ammunition, 2 lucky side shots using standard rounds. Holloway's voice cuts through morning radio chatter. Contact! Panther in prepared position. Approximately 300 yards, only turret visible. Morrison spots the target immediately. A Panther dug into a defensive emplacement with only its turret exposed above ground level. The German commander clearly knows his business. This is a last-stand position designed to extract maximum casualties before being overrun. Chen, load HVAP. We've got 12 rounds now, Sarge. Which one? Morrison almost laughs at the absurdity. 6 months ago, they possessed a single precious round. Now they have enough that Chen is asking which one to use. Any of them, just load it. The Panther fires first, the round cracking overhead close enough that Morrison feels the shockwave. Morrison doesn't flinch anymore after 9 months of this. His sight picture centers on the Panther's gun mantlet, the only vulnerable point visible on a hull-down target. Morrison exhales slowly and squeezes the trigger exactly the way his father taught him 20 years ago on an Iowa farm. The HVAP round flies true, hitting the Panther's gun mantlet and punching through. There's no dramatic explosion this time, just white smoke trickling from the turret as the German crew bails out with hands raised, surrendering. Holloway's voice carries something approaching pride. Morrison, that's your 8th confirmed Panther kill. You're officially our battalion's ace Panther killer. 8 Panthers destroyed. Morrison does the math automatically. 8 tungsten rounds out of maybe 15 HVAP total he's fired. The remaining kills came from flanking shots or point-blank range, using standard ammunition, when circumstances gave him angles that didn't require miracle rounds. The German crew stands with hands raised, looking young enough to be high school students, farm kids probably, just like Morrison. One of them, the commander, looks back at his destroyed Panther with an expression Morrison recognizes immediately. Loss, defeat, but also profound relief. They survived. That night, Morrison cleans his gun while Eddie Chen sits beside him in companionable silence that doesn't require words. Chen finally speaks. 8 Panthers, that's incredible, Sarge. Farm boy from Iowa who got lucky with good ammunition and better training. Morrison replies automatically. That's not how the other gunners see it. They say you're the best shot in the battalion, maybe the whole division. Morrison thinks about his father's simple instruction. Make your shots count. I just did what I was taught. Didn't waste bullets. Waited for the right moment. Trusted my training. He looks at Lucky Strike's hull, scarred with impact marks from 9 months of combat. It worked because I had ammunition that worked. Without HVAP, I'd be dead 6 times over. The war's almost finished, Chen says quietly. We're going to make it home. Morrison nods slowly, letting himself believe it for the first time. Yeah, I think maybe we are. May 8th, 1945. Germany surrenders, and Morrison's war ends in a small German town whose name he forgets within weeks. Lucky Strike has survived the entire campaign. So has Morrison's crew, Chen, Holloway, their driver Jackson, their loader Phillips. Against all probability, they made it through. They paint kill rings on Lucky Strike's gun barrel, 8 Panthers, 14 other German tanks, 22 confirmed kills total. Morrison's gun sight put rounds on target for most of them, though he always credits his crew because tanking isn't a solo sport. Morrison returns to Iowa in August 1945 after 9 months of occupation duty. His father meets him at the Cedar Rapids train station, and they shake hands firmly without discussing what Morrison experienced overseas. His father doesn't ask how many men his son killed. Morrison doesn't volunteer the information. That first evening home, Morrison's father hands him the old Springfield bolt action and mentions that rabbits have been thick this summer, eating the garden vegetables Morrison's mother worked so hard to grow. They walk the fence line in comfortable silence that Morrison missed desperately during 3 years away. Morrison sees a rabbit at 40 yards, raises the rifle, centers it in the iron sights. His hands are steady, farm hands that fixed tractors, milked cows, and fired thousands of rounds through a tank gun. Hands that killed 8 Panthers and came home. He squeezes the trigger smoothly. The rabbit drops cleanly. "Good shot," his father says with quiet approval. "Made it count." Morrison nods, and they continue walking. Later, sitting on the porch watching the sun set over cornfields Morrison grew up working, his father asks just one question about the war. "The special ammunition they sent you, did it work?" Morrison thinks about tungsten needles punching through armor that shouldn't have been penetrable, about farm boys and engineers and miners on 3 continents working together to solve problems that killed American tankers, about making 15 shots with HVAP ammunition count for 8 confirmed Panther kills, and 7 near misses that still accomplished their purpose. "Yeah, Pa, it worked when we had it." "You waste any?" Morrison remembers every HVAP round he fired, every sight picture, every moment of absolute concentration before squeezing the trigger. "No, sir. Made every shot count, like you taught me." His father nods slowly. That's all he needs to hear, all he wanted to know. That his son took the lessons learned on an Iowa farm and applied them where they mattered most. Morrison watches the sun paint the sky orange and purple over fields he'll work until he dies at 83 years old. He'll never tell his children the complete story of his war, just that he was a tank gunner who shot reasonably well and got lucky more often than he deserved. But sometimes, decades later, while working these fields, he'll remember the distinctive silhouette of a Panther tank. Remember the weight of an HVAP round. Remember that for 9 months in 1944 and 1945, farm boys from Iowa with experimental tungsten ammunition made the difference between American defeat and Allied victory in armored battles across France and Germany. If Morrison's story moved you, subscribe for more forgotten histories about the soldiers and technologies that changed World War II. Leave a comment sharing which aspect of this story surprised you most. Was it the tungsten shortage, Morrison's 8 Panther kills, or something else entirely? Tommy Morrison came home when thousands didn't. The tungsten helped. The training helped. But mostly, the simple farm wisdom his father taught him about making every shot count helped most of all. Farm boys from Iowa. They've always known about rationing precious resources and making every shot matter when it counts. They always will.